Hey everyone, Zach here. So today I'm going to walk through signing Ansible execution content with the CI/CD pipeline. So this is a follow-up to my previous post where I did it on the CLI, and this version is more intended for teams that are actually collaborating on developing automation content for Ansible Automation Platform. So I actually want to walk through. I have the diagram here that I always have at the top of my post, but I think this one is pretty good explanation of what actually is going to happen in the process. So the way this is intended to work is we have developers that are going to be committing, making changes, and then pushing ultimately up to a hosted repository. In this particular example, I'm using GitLab, and my CI pipeline definition file will be specific to GitLab schema. But as I note in the blog post, is many of the principles that you'll see could be ported over to another DevOps platform, so GitHub, Azure DevOps, Bitbucket, other tools like that. But within the pipeline is actually where the content signing is going to happen now, as opposed to me doing it on the CLI on my local machine, or even in my example where I use the pre-commit hook. It's actually going to happen when I open a merge request to the main branch for this repository. And then on the Ansible Automation Platform side of things, the project is going to be pointed at the main branch for the project itself, which will enable me to always ensure, right, that I have a valid signature, and the content that I'm running through Ansible Automation Platform matches what I expect. So without further ado, I'm going to open up VS Code and walk through the pipeline itself. So this is my GitLab CI pipeline file, which you can access with the source for this post. And at the top here, I'll start off very simply. I'm going to use an image that was already pre-built for Ansible development tooling. This can be used actually to spin up dev spaces to build your automation content, but I won't go into that. However, it worked really nicely for this use case because what I want in my pipeline runner is Ansible sign and Ansible lint and things along those lines, and this image has it, as well as Git. So the workflow here, the rules that I've specified are specific for my use case where I want to trigger when the source is a merge request event. So, thinking created or updated, things along those lines. I want to avoid duplicate pipelines if there is a commit branch and an open merge request. And the reason why is GitLab has two different types of pipelines, so the merge request pipeline and then the branch pipeline. If I have a merge request open, I don't want to duplicate the functionality, so I just prevent the branch pipeline from running and only run the merge request pipeline. And then the follow through there is if there is no open merge request, it would actually run the branch pipeline. So I then it's a very simple pipeline. I only have one stage here, and then I have two jobs within that stage. The first job is going to be just lint. It's super simple, running Ansible lint. I note in the blog post that you could make this more complicated with various options. You could configure the Ansible lint configuration file in your repository to change how this behavior works as well. So, excluding certain rules, including certain rules, changing error, warning, things along those lines. But then the next step is really what I want to focus on today. So the signing job. And you'll notice here I have some specific rules. In this particular case, I actually only want to sign if my target branch for the merge request is my default branch. So for me, that's main. And I'm doing that because I don't need to create a signature for other merge requests or branch pipelines. I really only want to create that signature when it's getting pushed to main. And so that's what that initial rule is for, and then the other ones follow just to make sure it doesn't run in other scenarios. The next key piece here is the variables. So the variables I have defined here are mostly for the signing, and then there's a variable for pushing a commit. So the first two are our GPG key pair, and the values for those are actually base64 encoded. I do that because GitLab CI variables don't support multi-line, so just simple base64 encoding, and then in the pipeline you'll see in the before script I do the base64 decoding. I also have the Ansible sign GPG passphrase, so that's going to be the passphrase for the private key. So when we invoke the Ansible sign command, with that environment variable set, it won't prompt, right? Which we obviously don't want in an automated pipeline. And then lastly is the CI token. That token is used to actually push the commit with the new signature to the branch that this merge request is open for. So that kind of brings us to the before script. The first thing I'm doing is importing my GPG key pair, so my public and private key. And you can see there that base64-D is doing the decoding. I then set up my git config, so I give it a username, user email, which is really just tagging the commit that's going to be made. And the important piece here is I'm setting the remote to the CI server host project path, which is going to configure to the, that makes it very flexible, right? I could have hard coded the project that I'm using, but this just configures to point it at whatever project this pipeline is running on. And the beginning part there is using Ansible, which is kind of a arbitrary username with the colon and then the CI token, right? So it's a personal access token that I'm providing. For a team, you actually probably want to use a group access token, but that's something I don't have access to because I don't have the paid version of GitLab. However, that is what allows us to push a commit in the automation pipeline. So that brings us now to the script itself. And the first thing we're going to do is do the GPG sign. And then once the sign is complete, we will do the GPG verify to make sure our signature is valid. And basically testing out to make sure when we sync on that Ansible Automation Platform side of things, we shouldn't expect any failures. I then stage those files, right? So the signature will go into a .ansible sign folder. So I'm staging any files in that folder. I create my commit with a comment there saying CI skip. The important piece here is I don't want to create an infinite loop. So if I commit to this branch, I don't want to re-trigger this pipeline. So that's what that CI skip is for. And then lastly, I'm going to do a push. And I also specify, it's kind of double validation. I'm specifying the CI skip option again. Either of those two would work. And then I'm pushing to the origin that I defined in my before script. And that is actually pushing it up to GitLab, right? Because the commit itself is local to the GitLab runner environment, and then the push will push it up to the branch. And what you'll see here when this happens is you'll actually see that two pipelines would have triggered, but they get skipped by the option that's provided. So without any more explanation there, that is the extent of the pipeline file. Your environment might require more customization, but this is definitely a good baseline to get you started. So now let's hop over into GitLab and take a look at what we see. So here in GitLab is my repository. I'm logged in as the maintainer, so you might see a slightly different view, especially with the side menu. But you should be able to access this repository and get a look. And what I'm going to do actually as part of this demo is commit my updates to the README. So the README is not very useful right now, but it will be in a moment. And I want to call out one thing for variables. So if you're setting up this repo, clone it and push it to your own project, you'll be able to set up settings in CI/CD. And from there is where you'll come to the variable section and define those 4 variables that are required for the signing step. So if you have any questions on how to generate the key pair, look at the CLI post that I previously uploaded because I walked through it there. And the passphrase, of course, is just the passphrase you create when you create the private key, so keep that. And then from the access tokens perspective there's another section here in settings, which is where you would generate that CI token and provide the value. Now, I'm not a GitLab guru by any means, so if you want to make sure you have the perfect level of security for these various variables, you'll see some tags like masked and hidden. I would consult with your GitLab team, but also masked ensures that it's not accessible in the pipeline, so it's never going to be printed out or things like that, which is a great level of security. And then hidden means I can't actually even view it in GitLab myself. So if I needed to recreate it, I'd have to delete and recreate the variable. There's additional settings that you can use in GitLab to make it even more protected, so definitely keep those in mind when you're setting up. But these were sufficient for me for the demo. So I go back to the repository. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a commit locally. So I'm going to add the changes I have. I made a minor change to one of the playbooks, so I'll show my status. So that playbook to manual to make sure the commit actually, the signature actually changes. And updates to the README is my main content here. Minor playbook. So I'm going to push that. and I push that to a remote branch, which is not going to do anything on its own because I don't have a merge request. So I'm going to come over to my merge request section here. I'm going to create one. And the target branch is already main, so that's exactly what I want. Highly recommend doing like specific, let me actually just give a better description here. So let's turn this into a list, just make things nice and pretty. See if this works. There we go. And then we'll say demo commit to generate new signature. And when I create that merge request, in your environment, given that you have the right merge requests and branch policies, this adds a significant layer of security, right? I can't actually just directly push my changes to the main branch, which is typically recommended. And by creating this merge request, it actually triggered a pipeline, which is going to sign the content for me, right? So I don't actually have to own that as a user, and as a main or like a contributor or owner of the repository itself, I don't have to expose the private key for signing to my users, right? They can make changes. Those changes require review to get into the main branch with a new signature, right? So really protecting the supply chain for the automation content that goes into production. So for instance, a lot of people look at things like running a playbook against host all, or things along those lines. So you'll notice here, we've got the pipeline skipped. That is, again, that re-triggering that we prevented from happening. But let's go look at the pipelines that ran, and we should see the one from our trigger that did pass. And it ran through. If we go to the pipeline itself, we'll see our two jobs for linting and signing. And if we go back to the merge request and we go to click on it, we'll take a look at our changes. You'll notice that there's now 2 additional files, right? So that actually happened during the pipeline. It uploaded a new signature, and you actually see the entry for playbook.yaml, right? Because that's a particular checksum that changed. So pretty cool. And now, assuming you had policies, right? I don't have anything crazy on my branch itself, but I go back to my merge request. I can merge it. I'm going to go ahead and just clean it up. Everything looks good. And then I can go over into Ansible Automation Platform. And let me log in here. And first, if I don't have a credential yet, I'm going to search for GPG. So make sure to create your GPG public key credential. The type here is GPG public key, and then you'll upload the public key associated with the key pair that you created or already had existing. Then we'll go over to projects, and we will look for, I believe I've already created the project for this, signed content CI demo. So you might be creating a new project here, and I'll go into the edit view. So in the edit view, the one thing that's really important here is obviously you have your source control URL. It will go to the default branch, which for me is main, but I could specify the branch here. And for additional security measures within like a production AAP, you want to make sure that this is locked down so a user can't override the branch. They can only run the main branch, which means they can only run content that has been signed. Very good thing. And then you'll attach a credential to the project so that when it syncs, it can do the signature validation. Let me cancel out of that. Let's go ahead and sync it. And what that should do is pick up the latest changes from our demo and validate it. So one thing I can do is if I actually go into the jobs for the project sync, if I scroll down, you'll see that it's actually verifying the project content. There's a task here, and it's verifying the project content against the checksums. So pretty cool way to do this. This is, to me, the more official way. We really want teams collaborating on automation content, building it into your CI/CD pipeline, having the appropriate policies in GitLab, as well as in Ansible Automation Platform. And there is the initial upfront setup, but once it's set up, after that, right, you'll have a very seamless experience for your users, and you'll have a secure supply chain for the content that's getting into Ansible Automation Platform. So I hope you enjoyed that demo. If you have any questions, feel free to drop a note. If you feel like I kind of glossed over something that may not be as obvious, also please let me know. I'm happy to add in any details that are needed. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you all at the next video.